You need to stop saying Joe Biden has dementia. That's what the liberals cried about for years when it came to President Joe Biden and his obvious mental decline. I have an article right here from March 2020 where they were writing and begging us to stop saying Joe Biden had dementia, calling him a lovable political gaffe machine. They insisted that his mental decline was a figment of Republican MAGA imagination and a tool being used by a despicable President Donald Trump to try to discourage people from voting for Joe Biden. All the while, we knew what we were seeing, but in typical liberal mainstream media fashion, they gaslit as many people as they could into believing or at least lying to themselves that President Joe Biden was completely mentally competent. But as usual, MAGA's opinions are being vindicated and proven correct. Axios recently released over 5 hours of the most damning audio evidence of Joe Biden's mental decline that I've ever listened to in my life. And I'm going to cover the highlights of those 5 hours right here on American Advocates. When it comes to the liberal fake news media gaslighting the American public, I want to bring this memory back up to your attention.
Because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've known him for years. The Brzezinskis have known him for 50 years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it. There's just no comparison between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Historians will look back and they will say, why was this race close in February and early March? Because it makes no sense.
Several months later.
We are coming on the air at this hour with breaking news. President Biden has just announced that he is ending his re-election bid.
Thankfully, there's a very real concept in the world of the truth being brought to the light. Luke 8:17, for instance, reads, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." And that verse is not just a suggestion, but it is a truth, meaning that it's an absolute guarantee of life that what you try to conceal will be brought to the light. That's what's happening right now with former President Joe Biden because of this Axios interview. Let's go over it. First and foremost, we have a very alarming segment of this interview where he's being asked questions about paperwork and documents and Afghanistan files. And instead of answering the questions, he goes off on a random tangent about his deceased son.
So during this time, we were living in Chambers Road, and there were documents related to the Penn Biden Center or the Biden, or the cancer for your shot, or your book. Where did you keep papers that related to those things that you were actively working on?
Well, I don't know. This is what, 2017, 18, that area?
Yes, sir.
Remember, in this time frame, my son is either been deployed or is dying. And so it was, and by the way, there were still a lot of people at the time when I got out of the Senate that were encouraging me to run in this period.
To make matters worse, more alarmingly even, he can't even remember when his son passed away.
What was happening though, what month did Bo die? May 30th, 2015. Was it 2015 he died?
2015.
I think it's 2015.
I'm not sure the months are, but I think that was
Yeah.
That's right, Mr. President.
And what's happened in the meantime is that Trump gets elected in November of 2017? 2016. All right. So, why do I have 2017 here?
That's when you left office, January of 2017.
Okay.
It quite honestly winds up getting so bad, in fact, that one of his lawyers or handlers, whoever's in the room with him, winds up essentially begging him to take a break so he can regather himself and try to re-enter the room in the interview more coherently.
Maybe it sounds so. Everybody knew how close we were. There was not anybody in the world who wondered whether or not. Anyway. And so.
Sir, I'm wondering if this is a good time to take a break. Briefly.
No, let me just keep going to get it done.
If you're interested in watching more of that Axios interview, I'll have the link for the full interview in my description below. But I want to point out something. This interview went no differently than the one that he recently just had on The View that wound up going viral because it exposed his obvious severe mental decline.
That all the projects, the benefits. How do you lead the world without having the best infrastructure in the world? How do you lead the world without having the best healthcare in the world? How do you lead the world without having the best education system in the world? How do you lead the world when you don't have that done?
And even to this day, after witnessing an interview like that in a disaster, you still have Democrat voters who loyally stick up for this guy and deny his dementia, claiming that he just has a stuttering issue. All of this footage that I have just shown displays much more than a stuttering issue. This is a severe mental decline we are witnessing every time he makes an appearance, and it's been happening for years. And I want to point something else out. This is something that conservative media, conservative YouTubers, people on social media were pointing out, and were getting banned off social media for doing so. Their content was being flagged as misinformation. And this is the importance of maintaining free speech on the internet and on social media for Americans at the very least. Being able to flag stuff like this as misinformation when it's so obvious only served to damage our freedoms, our liberties, and our country in general. Because how was this man the president of the United States? That's the question everyone should be asking. Many people are asking it, except for the most loyal liberals who love being gaslit by their media overlords and are content to spread the narrative and the lies that their media tells them to. And so that brings up the question that President Donald Trump asked once again on social media just moments ago, stating, whoever had control of the Autopen is looking to be a bigger and bigger scandal by the moment. It is a major part of the real crime that the presidential election of 2020 was rigged and stolen. This is why the unselect committee of political thugs who were given a full and complete pardon by the person who wielded the now illegally used Autopen deleted and destroyed all evidence and information from their corrupt and vicious witch hunt against me. He finishes by saying, whoever had control of the Autopen is just the beginning. The biggest crime of all is that the 2020 presidential election was rigged. MAGA won the election by millions of votes and everyone knows it. The Autopen scandal is indeed growing now in light of this Axios interview being released, because it should be clear to anybody with any common sense and logic that President Joe Biden was so mentally impaired he could not have been effectively running the office of the president, especially during his last 2 years in office. And thankfully, more and more people are tending to agree with this point. It was just announced recently that James Comer is launching an investigation into the Autopen use during Joe Biden's presidency.
Chairman Comer joins us now with the latest. All right, Chairman, you got your hands full. Tell us first about what you announced earlier today about what you're doing with the Autopen, because I do some work with the Oversight Project. They were on this early, but you are going and looking at who is controlling this Autopen, because Joe Biden, I mean, he's demonstrating that he doesn't have all the cognitive capabilities they had. That interview was from 2023.
Yeah. That's hard evidence. Early into President Biden's term as president, it clearly shows that he was in significant mental decline. It questions who was actually making the decisions. So what we found is not just with the pardons he issued, but many of the executive orders that the courts are now using to Trump-proof many of the executive orders that President Trump is trying to implement to make government more efficient. Many of these executive orders, as well as the pardons of Biden's entire family as a result of our investigation, these were all signed with the Autopen. We know there was a cover-up. The media, as usual, the legacy media is late to the game. What we want to know is who was in the ringleader of the cover-up, but who was making the decisions.
And you see, that is a good question. Could there have been a shadow president in office? And if so, who was it, I wonder?
You wish like you had a third term. And I used to say, you know what, if I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats, looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. I'd be fine with that.
Now that's a half joke, of course. I'm not entirely convinced that if there was a shadow president in office that it was Obama behind the scenes running everything. As I previously reported on a couple months ago on this channel, reports have already come in that former Biden aides have spoken out and are likely prepared to continue to speak out against this Autopen use. They actually describe one of the main users of the Autopen as a woman, with this woman's name being redacted from the former Biden aide's statement because the former Biden aide is not comfortable releasing her name at this point in time. However, her statement reads, "I feared no one as much as I feared that staffer. To me, that staffer basically was the president. No one ever questioned that staffer, period." And so there you have it. When it comes to Joe Biden's dementia, it turns out that once again, Democrats and liberals were either wrong or lying or both. And that once again, MAGA conservatives, President Donald Trump, and the right-wing media was completely correct. Maybe he doesn't clinically have dementia, but his mental cognitive decline was completely obvious even 5-6 years ago, and we knew what we were seeing despite what we were being told. This should serve as a poignant reminder to everybody that the liberal mainstream media is beyond corrupt, extremely biased, and only serves one purpose: to enforce the liberal narrative at all costs, even if it means lying to the American citizens.